So, today's family is the rose family, otherwise known as the Rosaceae. Now, the Rosaceae has a number of features that are distinctive and that you can use to determine whether or not you have something in the Rosaceae. Now, there is a wonderful website called Wildflowers and Weeds that a person named Thomas Elpell runs. He has a lot of our Native American plant families, and the ways we can determine what plants that we have out and about near us are being seen. Now, the limitation to his website is it only covers the North American families, and some of the families we will be going through aren't all North American, but it's a good resource. I really like the graphics he has for the different patterns or characteristics of these families. So, a couple of things about the Rosaceae. The flowers are 5-petaled, and they have numerous stamens, which are the pollen-bearing parts. The stalks with the yellow bulbs at the end that yield the pollen. If anybody has seen a crabapple flower in the past few weeks, you'll know just, a dozen or more stamens all along the outer edges of the center of the flower, surrounding that carpel or pistil, the female part of the flower. The flowers have 5 petals, although there are cultivated roses where different genetic mutations allow for extra petals. It's always in multiples of 5, but you'll get roses where it looks like it's nothing but petal. That is because the mutation for extra petals has been bred in somehow. Sometimes it's by means of having an extra set of chromosomes in the plant, which is common in plants in general, and we're going to talk about this briefly as it pertains to the Rosaceae. It's called polyploidy, and it's going to become important later. But the Rosaceae have a long history of selective breeding by humans for a number of different purposes. Several other characteristics. You always have saw-shaped leaf edges. They're serrate, so the leaf edges are not smooth. They generally produce cyanide and anthocyanins, so a lot of the Rosaceae have red coloration to the petioles, the edges of the leaves, the buds, the flowers. Very characteristic of this family. And the fruit is generally a kind of fleshy, round ball that results from the flower. So, the Rosaceae contain a number of different familiar plants. Most of them are perennials, and most of them are trees or shrubs. We have some rosaceous plants that are not trees or shrubs. Cinquefoil. We have strawberry in this family, which are herbaceous plants. An herbaceous plant is a plant that does not have any woody parts to it. It's a generally low-lying, soft-stemmed, green-colored plant. The Rosaceae are oftentimes trees and shrubs. They usually flower in the spring or the fall, with very few species flowering during the middle of the summer. Some selected breeds of strawberries are the exception to this. Humans have done a lot to really modify when plants do things to make life easier for us. Most species rely on insects to pollinate them. The Rosaceae is a great family for people trying to start a pollinator garden because bees adore the flowers of the Rosaceae. Particularly, apple and cherry The different brambles are really good for pollinators in multiple ways, which I'm going to talk about next. And then in the fall, spirea is really good for pollinators. Most species produce a large, soft, fleshy fruit. Some of them are known as stone fruits, wherein the seed is enclosed in a very tough casing in the very center of the fruit. Think about like a peach pit or a cherry pit. That center is not actually the seed. The seed is actually inside of that. You have this tough, what's called a pericarp. It's basically an extra shell over the actual seed. And stone fruits have a single seed, which is within a pit. And it's useful for passing through the digestive tract of an animal unharmed. The rosaceous fruits rely heavily on various animals, such as deer and bears and birds and humans, to eat the fruit and pass the seeds on through their waste products along the ground as they move about to move the seed from point A to point B. So this is the typical life history of the Rosaceae. Now, Rosaceae are found basically everywhere except for Antarctica, with the greatest diversity in the northern hemisphere. There's more land in the northern hemisphere, and unlike a lot of organism groups, you have quite a bit of temperate region diversity relative to tropical region diversity. Most taxa, most groups of organisms, the greatest diversity is going to be found in the tropics. But this group, you have a great deal of them, perhaps equally many temperate species as you do tropical species. Now, within the plants, they are known as, they're part of the Dicot class. And so, because you can't outgrow your ancestry, if you are a dicot, because dicot is only within the context of angiosperm, so if you're an angiosperm, you're either a monocot or a dicot. If you're a dicot, you're going to be an angiosperm because you can't outgrow your ancestry. You're only a dicot in the context of being an angiosperm. So if you're in the Rosaceae, you are also in the dicotyledonous plants, or eudicots. You're automatically an angiosperm as a result, and you're automatically a vascular plant because you can't be an angiosperm without being a vascular plant. You can be a vascular plant without being an angiosperm, but you cannot be an angiosperm unless you're a vascular plant. Now, we have 3 subfamilies in this decent-sized plant family. Now, the Rosaceae has about 4,000 species. It's a moderate-sized plant family. It's certainly not the largest that we're going to cover, but it's also not the smallest. The rose subfamily has several of our familiar faces, if you will. We have rose, we have strawberry, we have bramble, cinquefoil, things like that. There is a subfamily called the dryad subfamily. We're not going to worry about them because they're not important to what we're thinking of here. And then you have the almond subfamily. It is a huge rosaceous subfamily, the largest of the rosaceous subfamilies, that has a lot of our very familiar crop plants like cherry, apple, pear, quince, things like that. Also spirea and mountain ash, which have ornamental and pollinator appeal. And oddly enough, the Rosaceae is in a plant order known as the Rosaceae. And the Rosaceae has families that are close and far in their life history, morphology, and general expectation of relatedness. So we have the Moraceae, which has mulberries, figs, and a few other things within this order. The Rosaceae are a relatively interesting order. within the Rosaceae, we have the Urticaceae and Ulmaceae, which are quite distinctive groups of plants. The Urticaceae are herbaceous, soft, stinging plants, and the Ulmaceae are elm trees, which have totally different fruit and flower structures, but they're still in the same order as the Rosaceae, different families, of course. We have the Cannabaceae, which has hemp and hops and a few medically important plants, and a few other things that we don't have to worry about. So, fun stuff. We have a lot of Rosaceae that are important to human beings. First of all, ornamental value. You can't ignore the landscape industry or pretend that people don't make money growing plants that people do nothing but look at. Crabapple should stand out to people. East Farm and several other places around here have a yearly crabapple flower festival, and I don't think they're doing it this year for obvious reasons. But flowering crabapples come in a number of different growth forms and a number of different colors, flowering times, things like that make them really popular for floral appeal. The way the flowers look are really cool for people. Rose, of course, it's, very culturally significant. Hawthorn is an ornamental plant. Firethorn. So here we have firethorn or pyracantha. This is showy mountain ash. Serviceberry, that is kind of an edible wild plant. And then we have some edible plants like apple. Everybody loves apples, I hope. Really was hoping to do an apple grafting activity with the class this year. We'll have to wait till next year. Some fun stuff on how to propagate some of these things, because with a lot of these species, the way to propagate a particular trait you like is not to use seeds, because seeds are genetic remixes, so you may not get the characteristics you want. Cuttings are not practical because they have low rooting percentage and are slow, and so the most common way of propagating things like apples and pears, and a lot of the families that we see from here on out, would be to have a seedling where you have the roots from a plant, and then you get the parent plant that you want your fruit to be like. You want the flavor and the size and the texture and whatever other features of the plant, and you take a piece off and you graft it. You basically force the roots of the plant you don't want to feed the stem of the plant you do want. So grafting is very common with rosaceous plants. We have a genus called Prunus, which contains the cherry and the peach, the nectarine, the apricot, the plum, almonds, a number of things that are not only useful for food crops, but for ornamental value. Flowering cherry, flowering plum, which is a bit of a misnomer because all cherries and plums flower. They're flowering plants. The way they normally reproduce is to produce flowers and fruits. But the flowers of these are particularly attractive, so they're called flowering cherries because you wouldn't buy it to eat the fruits off of it. You'd probably be safe to eat the fruits off of it, they just wouldn't taste good. Now note, I underlined peach, nectarine, and apricot here because these are all the same species. They're just different breeds of the same species. So Prunus is a very important genus within the Rosaceae. And then we have the genus Rubus, which contains the brambles, which you guys may know as your blackberries and raspberries, as well as a few other related berry species. Now, botanically, they're not berries because they're actually aggregate fruits. Each one of these tiny things is its own fruit, and it's more of a drupe, which is like a stone fruit. It's a single-seeded fruit. So this is an aggregate fruit. We call them, raspberries and blackberries, but they're not technically berries. A berry is a soft, fleshy fruit with a nondescript pith or center. The seeds are basically evenly distributed throughout the fleshy material of the fruit, and it's got a coating to it. So, like a blueberry, if you squish a blueberry, the seeds are kind of just wherever in that globby matrix of material. That's what a berry is. A drupe is kind of like a berry, except the seed is centered and there's only a single seed. This is an aggregate of drupes, so it's an aggregate fruit, but it's an aggregate of drupes. So the Rosaceae is an important family. It's a distinctive family, and it's one that we will be working with and we'll be seeing. I don't think we could go a day without encountering Rosaceae.